So before giving the floor to our speakers, please allow me to briefly introduce them to you. Anne-Marie Lafortune is a teacher and coordinator of the Intercultural Center at Cégep de la Gaspésie et des Îles. She's taught across the world, for example, in France, South Korea, and Australia. And thanks to Cégep International, she's been to Finland to discuss ALMs or autonomous learning modules, which are the topic of today's webinar. Brett Fisher is a teacher and researcher at Cégep André Laurando in Montreal. He holds a PhD in integrated studies in education, and he's led several ECQ and PARIA-funded projects. In today's webinar, they will discuss autonomous learning modules with Fergal Bradley and Satu von Boom, who both teach English at the University of Helsinki. Their teaching and research interests include language advising and counseling and learner and teacher autonomy. Satu is the current coordinator of the ALMs program at the University of Helsinki, and Fergal is currently completing doctoral studies at Tampere University in Finland. So without further ado, let's get started. Have a good webinar, everybody.
All right, everyone. So welcome to the webinar. Very excited to have you all with us today. Satu, Fergal, Brett, and myself are excited to discuss this topic with you. It's something that really stems from a spark that I think a lot of educators feel, which is how can I do better as a teacher? But more than that, because it's not about us, it's about our students. How can my students learn in a deep manner and in a way that is going to last for a long time? And so in my personal journey as a CEGEP teacher, I just remember clearly a moment where I was standing at the back of my classroom with my students in English as a second language, and they were taking this listening comprehension exam. All my students were going to do that, so I was going to have 100 copies to mark. They were watching a video on a topic they had not chosen, trying to understand the questions, trying to understand the video. It was one of the final exams, and I just remember standing at the back of the class and thinking, this is not something they chose. This is not a topic they're interested in. I'm not even sure that a student who gets all their marks on this exam is truly able to understand in a conversation in English in a context that wouldn't be in the classroom. And so I just remember feeling very tense and wanting to do better as a teacher so that my students can have a deeper experience of English as a second language. And thinking also, you know, a lot of our students have been learning English as a second language since elementary school, yet they get to CEGEP and they still are at the beginner's level. They have that sense of helplessness, learned helplessness, and they're still struggling. And so I started doing a bit of research, and that's where I came across the work of a fellow teacher from Helsinki University, Tuula Lehtonen. And I remember the title of one of her articles, which was, "You will certainly learn English better at work than you would from a textbook." And to me, that was the first spark, which is authentic learning rather than learning in silos with subjects that are very interesting, but that are not necessarily tailored to the learner's needs. And this applies to really anything, because once I got on this route, and started talking about this with fellow teachers in chemistry, in physics, in any topic really, what we're finding out is that when students are interested in the topic and when they're given autonomy in a way that is supported, and they choose what angle interests them, still within the competencies of the course, they do a lot better because they're motivated, because it makes sense to them, and because they'll even push this further, not because of the carrot and the stick, but because there's that intrinsic motivation. So I contacted Tuula in Finland and then was invited to go through Cégep International to spend, I believe it was 2 or 3 weeks there, where I met a lot of great teachers, including Satu, including Fergal. I was shadowing classes. I was asking a lot of questions, and they had it set up in a way that I was having lunch with a different teacher every day. So I just learned so much. And the concept of autonomous learning modules really is the core of what they do there for English as a second language learning. And so I came back home and I thought, all right, great, I'm going to replicate this, bing, bang, boom, copy, paste. So the students basically look at the competencies, they choose what project they want to work on. And then after that, we meet once in a while and then they present their final project. So interestingly enough, that was a total flop because our students are not used to that. They're not used to that level of autonomy. They're not used to that level of choice. It was very confusing to a lot of them. Some really enjoyed it and did very well, but for a lot of students, it was very challenging. And one of the key points was that they were always asking me, what do you want? What am I supposed to write here? Like, what's the correct answer? And a lot of science students would ask me how this was fair because there was not a standardized test. And so how could this work with their R score? How could they do well, get 100% and do better than their classmates, which is something that is important to a lot of them that want to go in programs that really requires very good marks. And so I had to rethink the autonomous learning module for our system, and it's not a perfect recipe, and it's something that I'm humbly sharing today, and that I'm happy to have Satu and Fergal also answer our questions, everybody's questions here. And that's why I also brought, Brett on board, because he likes to think differently and try to see how we can further everything in terms of pedagogy, but also making sure that it's done in a way that can be coherent across the board. And so again, very humbly, I'll just briefly share what was done in my class, where I would basically scaffold with the students for the first half of the semester, working on the different skills, but slowly but surely giving them a lot more autonomy. And one of the key elements that I was using was those active learning classrooms. And when you think active learning classrooms, don't think high tech. It's really just that the tables are put together, and so the students can work together as a group. And then you've got whiteboards on the walls, so they can think tank, they can start working on topics that interest them, they can help each other out, which is also one of the pillars in ALMs, is that the teacher is obviously essential in designing the learning activities for the students, but even so, the students within each other will have that support from each other where they can learn and where they can take the learning further. And so working with this, I was then able during the second half of the semester to ask my students what they would like to work on in terms of their autonomous learning module project. And so this would be, for instance, something where in ESL they have to read, write, listen, and speak. And then you've got the umbrella of grammar and vocab on top of that. So it's all right, so you go and you pick 3 different articles that you'd like to read about, and then you can do a podcast about it. And then with that, you can do an activity with the students in class, and so forth. So everything was interrelated. And then I had them put all of this together on an online portfolio that they would then showcase at the end of the semester. So when we did something like this, and it was done in small groups rather than in front of the class, it started feeling a little bit more authentic to the students. But even so, I would ask them questions, when they were showcasing their work, and they still felt like I was testing them and like I was being very unfair for picking on them and for asking questions, because to them, an oral presentation is an oral presentation. So you basically memorize what you're supposed to say it, and that's the end of it, and you should get a mark for that, right? So when the teacher is asking questions, then they feel like you're testing them, and they're not necessarily prepared to answer every question. But if you look at the competency, for example, in English as a second language beginners level, it's to express a simple message. And being able to communicate is one of the key aspects of a dynamic language, unless you're studying Latin and then you don't necessarily speak it. So this is something that has been a work in progress, and I'm just happy to share this today and have Satu and Fergal elaborate a little bit more on what can be done. The core being that the students have a lot of choice and a lot of autonomy in the process, but we are still there as teachers to support them, to design the learning activities, and there needs to be a scaffolding process where they're not just parachuted into that autonomous process, because that can be scary and also for us as teachers, we need to have clear guidelines and clear evaluation grids. So I'll let Brett continue with the presentation by this one.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. I think you've raised a lot of really interesting questions that people who are tuning in can identify with regardless of their discipline. I think we all want to see our students demonstrate a higher degree of autonomy, but the question really is, how is that compatible with our own system? How can we work in more autonomy in a system where students are being compared to one another for an R score, and where, you know, the idea is show me a standard so I can outperform everyone else. So how do we introduce this notion of autonomy into our schools, into our CEGEP system? First, we should probably find out a little bit more about what ALMs looks like and see if our counterparts at the University of Helsinki have some ideas for us. So to begin, Fergal, Satu, I'd like to ask, can you explain briefly what the ALMs approach is and why it's effective in fostering learner autonomy? And practically, what does ALMs look like for students? And if you could provide some concrete examples, that would be even better.
Absolutely. We are very much delighted to be involved. Thank you very much for inviting us. And yeah, whilst I prepare for sharing, just a second. Here we go. Good. So if I start, and then Fergal will follow up in a minute as well. So indeed, ALMs is what we call our module or modules. It's autonomous learning modules. And I'd like to start with a bit of history. So ALMs started in 1994 with the pioneers, and we owe everything to them. So Lena Karlsson, Fles Kiesik, and John Ludden started first kind of thinking about how to improve learner well-being and how to create something that would be a very different approach to what was maybe the mainstream way of learning in the 1990s. It's an English course. We do also have a Swedish variant. It's not identical because what we do works within our setting, and everything is very much context-based. So what we have created over the past 30 years works for us, but it would not maybe work for another context. We are currently a team of 10 teachers, and we have at the moment about 500 to 600 students per year in the ALMS program, so 27 groups per year. And I just asked my superior, my boss, and she says that this means roughly 25% of the English courses or students in the English courses. So it's not for everybody, but for the ones who choose it, this is ALMS. So ALMS is indeed a course, and for typical students, it lasts for 14 weeks, so the autumn term or the spring term. And the way we do it is fairly straightforward if you think about it. So we all start with 2 group level opening meetings where we discuss the cornerstones of autonomy. We discuss what it means to study autonomously and how that's different from, for example, studying independently. We'll come back to this later on. And within these 2 group meetings, the students get started with thinking what it means for them to learn, how they best learn, and what kind of activities, what kind of projects, what kind of tasks would suit them, and what they actually need English for in their lives at the moment and in the future. And then we meet all the students 3 times in individual counseling sessions lasting approximately 15 to 20 minutes per session. We start obviously with the first one talking about this particular student's background, how they have learned English so far, what they want to be able to do with English, and what kind of activities, goals, and so on they want to set for themselves. Then midterm, we discuss the progress that students have made so far, and we see what has been achieved so far and what still needs to be done. And then obviously at the end, we hopefully establish the student has done a good job, everything is done and complete, that the student has learned a lot and is able to earn credits. We have a few requirements regarding what the autonomous work must include. So they cannot be just anything, but there has to be an element of or some elements of academic content. But what that means for the individual student, we indeed discuss with that student. There needs to be some level of social interaction. And we expect the students to join a minimum of one skills support group, but they might join many others as well. And they might join groups outside of the ALMS community. We also expect reflection on their learning in the form of a diary or a log or a blog or whatever the student wants to create. Maybe I'll hand over here to Virgo so he can explain the typical student's plan.
Yeah, so just to mention as well that I think just to add to what Satu said, there's, I think all the students at University of Helsinki, and I think all Finnish universities, have some amount of language learning that they need to do as part of their degree. Now, most students end up choosing English as their foreign language, as it's really familiar. I think it's quite kind of built into the society somehow here, even though it's a Finnish-speaking and Swedish-speaking to an extent country as well. But there's a lot of English, and especially in the academic life, a lot of reading and writing, visiting lecturers, and so English is really common and really typical for the students. So like Satu said, maybe 25% of the students choose this ALMS version, so they can choose different type of more maybe traditional teacher-led courses as well, or maybe even online courses or something as well. Yeah, I mentioned maybe about the counselling as well that you mentioned, Satu. Like our cornerstone is very much language counselling, and so we kind of see ourselves after. Can you go back one slide? Thanks. Yeah. After these first two group opening sessions where we kind of get the course started, we then kind of see ourselves more as counsellors rather than teachers. And instead of trying to tell our students what to do, we're trying to get them to, we talk to them basically, get them to talk about what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, how things are going, and encourage them, ask them questions, encourage them to reflect on their own work. So try to engage them in a dialogue, so we're not just telling them what to do. And of course, sometimes we take on our teacher roles again and give them like advice, but most of the time we want to get them to talk and think about their language learning themselves. But we can give a short example now of maybe a typical ALMS plan, something that the student might do during their course. So it's usually about 100 hours of study that they do for this course. And this would be an example of something they might do. So they might join an academic writing group, or maybe study some academic writing like material or background information independently. They might do some practice tasks or write some text and get some feedback and maybe revise their texts or do some work on academic writing. They might even connect it to some real academic task that they have, like maybe writing an essay for another course that they have, and they're using that real task as a kind of background for this. They might join maybe a conversation or discussion support group that we run. So they might meet maybe 5 or 6 times and talk with other students in the ALMS program. And they might choose some reading, for example, like some academic reading that they have to do, and maybe make some summaries of it in, say, in Finnish or in Swedish, or perhaps maybe make a vocabulary list based on keywords to their field, or maybe write a reflective report on their reading or something like that. They might do some novel reading, typical language learning things like grammar and vocabulary exercises, but they might also try and integrate English into their daily lives more by like changing their news watching into English, or trying to engage family and friends that maybe there's already some English in their life, and maybe try to emphasize that and get their partner or their friends to go and speak English with them and do something in English, maybe to do with their hobbies or their work or whatever it is that's in their life. And then they're recording all of this and writing about it in a diary, which could be a typical type of diary, you know, where they write every day the little entry, or it might be more like a log or a blog. Some use very kind of interesting multimedia type you know, systems to do it. Sometimes they do video logs and different things. So they have a really free hand in how they record it, reflect on their work. But you know, that's kind of a really key part of autonomy for us, is that you not only do the work, but you also think about what you want to do beforehand, and then think about after, well, evaluate it. How did it go? What did I learn from it? And do I want to do the same thing again next time? Yeah, so that's a little overview of how the course runs.
We do have a blog, so at this point we'll maybe mention it there, and the address is now visible to all of you who are interested in learning more about ALMs. And then the QR code there gives you the direct link to a short video we have about ALMs, where you can see Fergal explaining the ALMs program. This one is intended for Finnish students or students in Finland or in Helsinki trying to or planning to take the ALMs course. But I think it will be maybe interesting to you all as well. I'll stop sharing here at this point.
Okay, thank you for that fascinating overview. And I just want to touch on a couple of points that you mentioned. When I first started working with you, I had done my PhD in creativity, but not in autonomy. And I realized there were all sorts of things that I assumed that were wrong, that I didn't know, and particularly about the ALMs program, things that I first understood that later you corrected me on. Like, for example, ALMs isn't a program that's for everyone. There's only, you know, there are some students who can choose a more traditional route with more structure, and some students can choose the ALMs route, or that there's a difference between autonomy and independent learning. And I think that's one of the key things that's really come out of our talks for me, is understanding the difference between independent learning and what's autonomy. So a couple of years back now, actually, Anne-Marie proposed a survey of Quebec teachers to understand what is our understanding of autonomy here. So correct me if I'm wrong, Anne-Marie, but I believe there were 14 points in the survey, 14 questions. Was it 10 questions and 14 respondents?
10 questions, 14 respondents, yes.
That's what it was, 10 questions, 14 respondents. And so it was just to kind of touch on what is our understanding of autonomy here. Could you tell us what some common misconceptions were and how you would clearly define autonomy for newcomers to this topic?
Well, indeed, I mean, autonomous learning is not independent learning. It's something that I would say is much better. If you think about a traditional independent learning or a course where you study independently, what in most cases it means is that the teacher tells you what to do, what materials to do, what concrete output maybe to produce, and by when to do that, and how they will then maybe mark it. That's maybe a kind of traditional independent course or independent learning. What we offer is something very different, and in my opinion, indeed much better. So the students are the locomotors in this one. So they are the ones who individually set the goals, decide on the activities, on the materials. They are also the ones who evaluate their own progress and decide, okay, am I doing something that's worthwhile? Am I learning from this activity? And they are also then responsible for recording that or reflecting on that in some sort of a diary, blog, whatever it is, so that both they and the counselors can go back to it and discuss, okay, what is it that you're doing? And I think a critical aspect of ALMS is indeed also the fact that we counselors meet the students and we get to know them, and we find out what their background is like, what their goals for life are. And then obviously the student who is interested in becoming a researcher maybe wants to do something different than the student who maybe has different goals in life. And then, of course, also faculties, disciplines are different, and students then might have different kind of priorities in life as well. And in our understanding also in the ALMS approach, your whole life can be ALMS. So your hobbies, your interests, your friends, your family, everything can be incorporated if you find an English language angle to it. And I think students are very creative indeed in finding different kinds of ways and tools and possibilities for this.
I think maybe little important point there as well to say is that I think ALMS comes very much from a learner autonomy, especially in language learning tradition. So there's a long tradition there of research, and definitely Lena Carlson and Fliss Kizek and Joe Nordland, who started the program originally, were very influenced by the work of Henri Olec in Nancy in Cropel in France. And Henri Olec's work is kind of really important, I think, a starting point. And then later on, I think people like Leni Dam in Denmark and David Little as well in Dublin, working on this. And I think there's a big learner autonomy community in Japan, which we work a lot with as well. But some of the key definitions that we tell our students at the start is that autonomy is about taking charge of your own learning, taking control of it. It's about planning your learning. It's about learning, going and doing the work, and then also like reflecting on it, and that's like a cycle, or evaluating it yourself. And also David Little has a really nice list of things autonomy isn't. And one thing he says is it's not self-study without a teacher. So just learning on your own. That it doesn't mean that the teacher isn't doing anything, or the teacher's just kind of sitting there having a cup of coffee and waiting for you to finish the course. The teachers, can intervene and ask questions and be critical and support and be an active participant in the learning. They're just not making all the decisions. That the learner is kind of encouraged to make the decisions. They don't also have to decide everything. They can maybe sometimes say, well, I don't know how to learn this. Many of our students, for example, they might know exactly, like, I can read a book. I just know I need to read more, and there's plenty of material I can read, but I don't know how to do academic writing, and I need help with that. So I need to go to one of your support groups to get some information from a teacher, to get some feedback, to get some instruction. So it's about thinking about what I need help with and what I can do more maybe on my own. Maybe some things you can do independently, but some things you might need much more help with and much more structure. And they're both autonomous learning because the student has decided that. Yeah, is there anything else? Yeah, maybe as well to say that, I don't know, autonomy is not like, it's not just something you switch on. I think it's a lifelong thing. So I think you're always trying to kind of, think about, well, for a student, maybe it doesn't happen overnight, or it's not just something you do and then you're autonomous. I think it's a struggle, it's a process, it's something to keep going on with the learning all the time.
Yeah, it's not just suddenly you're 18 and you're autonomous. Would be nice for a lot of parents who are out there listening. But and another question for you, that raises the issue of students who do struggle with autonomy. What can you do with somebody who is struggling in this model? How can you help them?
Well, like I just said, Brett, there, I think everyone struggles to some extent. I think we have, I don't know, like I said, 500-600 students here. Now, some of them, they come to the course, they know exactly what they want to do. They have a brilliant plan from day one, and they do it, and we talk to them and they tell us what they've done, and it's great. But that's very much the minority. Most students need help, and that's exactly why we have the group sessions at the beginning, the counseling sessions throughout the course, the support groups along the way. And we encourage students to kind of break things down into, what they need. We use the counseling sessions to talk about, well, what they might want to do. We try to demystify the process and make it simple and concrete. So I think our support groups are a really good example for a student who's maybe not so good with time management, or self-efficacy and maybe they procrastinate a lot, you know, we encourage them to maybe take more groups so they can structure their course, and they don't maybe have to kind of make all the decisions immediately, or on you know, on their own. Maybe they have a group there helping them along, and they have support, and they have encouragement from peers and from a teacher and that as well. So I think we have plenty of different options for students. We also give them lots of examples from previous students. I was talking to a student a couple of weeks ago who said, well, at the start of the course, I really didn't know what I was doing, but kind of slowly throughout the first couple of weeks and throughout the first few meetings and looking at your blog and your examples of what previous students have done, I kind of worked out what it is that we need to do. So I think that's really the important point, is that there's examples, there's opportunities, there's support there available in many different ways. I think we have a lot of materials as well that students can maybe get started with, that we talk about, like, well, what kind of materials would you like to use? And we talk about that in our counselling sessions. So, okay, well, you know, we try to find together what would be a good way to start. But it's not for everyone as well. Some students decide that this is not for me. This I need every week at the same time in the same place. And you know, we have lots of other courses that, you know, in our language center in general, that students can take as well. But I think there's lots of ways to do ALMs in particular. So, you know, in terms of our course, but autonomy is difficult. It's not easy for lots of students, I think, to get started. So I think those are the things like scaffolding and support and examples and community and these kind of things. I think that maybe help students who are struggling with autonomy.
I think it's also the fact that the students, we acknowledge the fact that they come from different backgrounds, they have different skills when they start, and they have different expectations, they have different goals in life, and all of those are fine. So what we want to do is find exactly the activities for this student work the best, but that some that are still challenging enough, that take them further in the learning, but that they are not kind of dictated on by outside forces or and also I think that the fact that they can use their family, their friends, the teachers to the extent that they want to is definitely a plus in the ALMs program.
Yeah, I think we have time maybe just for one more question. Oh, sorry, Henry, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a quick note, because I think this is brilliant, how the ALMs approach segues into the framework of the community of inquiry, right? And so inquiry meaning that we want to learn something, we want to grow, and it doesn't happen in isolation. It doesn't happen just with the teacher or just with the learner, right? There are those two presences, but there's also that social presence that ALMs really puts forward with those support groups where students help each other out. And I was quite surprised when I attended those, because sometimes the teachers were not even there, right? And so the students really take responsibility for running those groups, which is something that I didn't think it was possible. And the fourth presence in that community of inquiry framework is that learner presence. And so instead of just mindlessly staring at the teacher and then knowing what it is that I need to memorize and then write in an exam, I also have that presence of, as they're saying, you know, I know what my goals are, I know where I want to go, and I know how to get there, and what I need to work on and what I need to improve. So I just wanted to segue that here as well, because I think it's beautiful, and it's a way of looking at learning that is very complete, as opposed to the sage on stage that you know, the banking model of education, where I just deposit knowledge into the recipient's head. So just a thought here. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of scaffolding and a lot of social support. So it's like, you know, real learning partnerships where everyone's working together. One last question, because I'm being very cognizant of the time here. We have, what would you say are some of the key benefits, takeaways, students who for whom this really works? What is it that you're seeing in them? What are they getting out of this?
Different students indeed get very different things, and as we've said a number of times, ALMS doesn't work for everybody, but it works for many people. At least you can make it work for you. And I think we do need to acknowledge the fact that different students need different things. So some of us really want or some of the students really want more teacher presence and more advice and so on. Others cope with less. Some people really have high academic ambitions, and other people have ambitions but not in the academic front. So for them, whatever they do, there needs to be the academic content, some level of that. But what that is, we negotiate exactly for that student. And then some people for whom the social aspect is relevant, then we can again negotiate, okay, how much for you is the requirement of social presence and activation and so on. And then I think the benefits are indeed also the flexibility in ALMs. We usually meet students for 3 times, beginning, mid, and end. But if the student needs more, I'm happy to meet them more often. And then, of course, the kind of everything is tailor-made for the student, but the student is usually the one who does the work. So what we do is, of course, support, acknowledge, help to the extent that particular student needs the help, but we don't start pushing or forcing it if the student is particularly autonomous already and doesn't need so much guidance.
All right, I think that's all the time we have, but I can see, clear benefits for the students for whom this really works, that it's a great avenue towards taking them towards lifelong learning and being independent learners and being able to use those skills outside of the classroom as they continue to converse in English, travel, perhaps work in English, and use it and become stronger speakers, learners, writers, everything. So wonderful. Thank you so much for answering the questions that we had today. And I do want to close off just by saying that I think, touching back on what Anne-Marie said, we can hear how this model can make learners more independent, can create people who are in a position to do more with language after they graduate than just answer a multiple choice questionnaire. They can interact, they can achieve goals on their own. So I hope that people who are listening can see the value of this, and I hope that you look to the new Devis in English as well that we've just produced and will be coming out soon, and has incorporated what Anne-Marie was talking about, some kind of a middle ground between what ALMS is and what we can do here in our own context. So take a look for that when that's available. We can't discuss it yet. It's not an officially released document, but it will be coming up soon. So keep your eyes peeled. And now we turn to Andy and to the audience for any questions.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, Brett, Fergal, Satu, for sharing this very inspiring practice, telling us a little bit more about how it works at the University of Helsinki, but also discussing examples that made us think about how it could work in a Quebec context.